Join me as we talk all things true crime.
Made contact and shattered.
Reference to a missing 4-year-old. The parents have called in and advised that the mother had went for a walk, came home, now they can't find her, they've been yelling for her.
Turn it over to another agency. Let's get some help.
Where are your kids? They've been missing for 4 months. You have nothing to say? You're over here in Hawaii? Dad, where are Lori's kids?
4 were stabbed multiple times and were likely asleep during the attack. Some had defensive wounds.
Most of them had just like one that was the lethal stab wound.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, please like and subscribe. And just let me know, chat, if you can hear me. I want to start off with playing the interview that Shannon Gray did with Brian Enton. You guys might have already seen it, but I think it's a good foundation to start the stream on and the discussion on. And it's just about them demolishing the house and how Shannon Gray is saying that, you know, the families have reached out to the university who now owns the house and has, you know, expressed to them that they would wish them not to demolish it before the trial. And pretty much it just seems as though the people who own it at the university are just not listening to the wishes of the family. And we're just going to discuss the case in general because I have other things I want to show you separate from demolishing the house topic. And yeah, I just want to wish CDT a happy birthday. I don't know if she's here yet or if she's listening. If she comes in later, make sure everybody wishes her a happy birthday. And yeah, so everyone can hear me, right? And good morning, Carol freaking Claus, Princess Megan Elsa, Donna, Wolfie's here, Joe's here, Laura Kraft is here, E.E. Caroline, Florida Bass Fishing, Shauna, Frigaria. It's good to see you guys. Unravel and Jesse is here. Okay, so let me just share my screen. And again, we're going to be discussing, you know, why we feel it should or shouldn't be demolished. And you guys feel free to express your opinion, even if it's different than mine. I'd like to hear all angles and all sides. And then we're going to go into like some edits that I had done and a pre-recorded read-through of an article that I was reading about the importance and the risks that lawyers take when they send the jurors to the crime scene. So the whole article is sort of centered around how they did that in the Alex Murdoch trial. But within the article, it sources other crimes and other trial cases where the jurors have gone to the crime scene and, you know, the outcome that those ones had. So we'll just be sourcing some other cases that are dealing with sort of the same subject, you know, the jurors having the opportunity to visit the crime scene. And we're going to hear some expert opinions. There's a law professor, I think from Cornell, and then another one. And then there's a juror expert also within the article too. So like I said, we'll just start with this and then we'll work into that. And thank you all for being here.
Become such a big deal.
Keep it quilted means you keep it.
Become such a big deal.
I really can't explain it to you. It seems very commonsensical. What a privilege it is to the University of Idaho to be able to just demo the place and move on. That's not something the victims' families or even the community has the opportunity to do. But they've taken this stance where we want to know what you think, but then we don't really want to listen to what you think if it doesn't agree with our line of what we want to do with the house. So it's beyond me and it's beyond the families, the Gonzalez family in particular, about why they're demoing the house, why they're moving so fast. I think we've expressed, you know, over and over again to them that it's important to just keep the house there just in case someone needs it. And then when the trial's over, do whatever you want with it. You know, and the response has basically been, victims' families spend legal money to give us a legal argument on why we shouldn't have to be able to demo the house, which I find is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting that they asked the families what they thought, and even hearing from most of the families that they didn't want the house to be demolished, they're still going forward with it anyway. Can the prosecutors do anything? I mean, obviously the families are in close contact with the prosecution. Can they not step in and say, hey, can you guys just wait 6 months or so?
Well, I think that's part of the non-dissemination order, right? I am an attorney that's involved. I can't comment on what I think the prosecutor should do, what I think the defense should do.
And I just want to pause it real quick just to clarify. So is the defense and the prosecution okay with the demolition? Because that's the understanding that I have in this, that, neither sides are really trying to hold on to this house. You guys let me know what you think.
Any of those things, right? So I think the Gonzalez family and it seems that the prosecution and the defense have both released the house, and I think everyone can make their own opinion on that, but I can't comment on it because of the non-dissemination order.
I understand. So, one of the things that's been hard to track, Shannon, is the timeline on the demolition, because they said it was going to happen imminently at one point, which was quite some time ago, and now they're still removing items from the house, but it is still standing. Are they giving the families or you any more specifics on a timeline?
No, not really. I mean, initially it was set to be demolished, and then the defense put a stop to it. And then they got a chance to go in and take a look at the house, things like that. And then the private items, the personal items were removed. A lot of the personal items were removed from the home. They were turned over to the families.
And see, that's interesting, because remember how early it was, as soon as Ann Taylor joined the team and stepped forward as his public defender, we saw her and her crew at the house. So the way that Shannon is just saying this just now, it makes it seem like they had plans before that even happened to get rid of it, which would mean that was what, January, like December? When did we see Ann Taylor at that house? Very soon after. So it's just interesting to me that like we're catching waves of like, yeah, they want to demolish it, but it seems like before we even caught the waves of it, it was like being discussed like, yeah, let's do this, before Ann even had the chance to like get there.
And then they contacted us and said, hey, if there's any kind of furniture or large items that you might want that are still in the house. And I was contacted by the families and said, hey, Shannon, can you walk the house so we can see if what we want and what we don't want? And basically the university said, no, Mr. Gray, you're not going to be allowed into the house at all. And we'll remove the items, and then we'll let you know when you can pick those things up or get those things.
And when we get through the article that I'm going to read for you guys about the importance and the risks of jurors visiting the crime scene, they discuss how during the Alex Murdoch trial, the prosecution really didn't want the jurors going there. They said that, things had changed already since the crime. Like even trees had grown. It was a different season by the time they went to look at it. So it's interesting how in that case, the prosecution was like, no, we don't want you guys going there. It's not the same setup. And now here we're hearing in this case that, they've already emptied the house. And as you guys all know, like it's just not in the same state or condition. Nothing is the same. So it's very interesting to think like very soon after this crime, it seems they were just like, okay, the idea of the jury going to the house just seemed like, no, absolutely not going to happen here in this case. Like right off the bat, it was just, that option was just swept under the rug. Like, let's clear it out. Just kind of weird. And yeah, Shauna said, didn't they have a cleaning crew there last week? They did. I understand like the family wanting personal items, etc., but it's just, I don't know. Do you guys find it odd? And of course, I'm trying to look up other cases where they've demolished the crime scene before the trial. And I had no luck finding another example to kind of compare it to. I don't know how you guys feel about all that, or if you guys know any examples where this has happened. It's interesting. And Liz said, but they were murdered in the house. The jury surely should have had the option. I agree. And right off the bat, getting rid of the items, like we saw all the images of them, carrying the shoes and the bags out and all that. And like, it didn't really click in my mind at the time. Like, wait a minute, are we not ever going to let anyone in this house to see what it was like? And, they have those 3D crime scene, what are they called? I don't know, just how they can do the 3D scans and stuff. But there's just no comparison to being able to walk through the scene. I mean, how many times have we gone through the realtor 3D walkthrough of the house and other scans of the house, and we've like really gone inch by inch through the entire room and hallways, and it just doesn't really feel real still. And I feel like the article that I read kind of describes that, because there are jurors in that article that I'm going to read that were in other cases that walked the crime scene, and they discussed how like they were able to see the scenes that were being mentioned in the trial, and then once they had seen it in person, it all kind of made sense to them and in their minds. So it's definitely interesting to see this. Absolutely no chance at all, it seemed, that anyone was going to be able to walk through and see what it was like as is. So I don't know, it's just very strange.
And so, and throughout that entire time, from the beginning, we've asked them not to demo the house.
The problem, Wolfie, I feel about the scans, like, even though it's like, yes, this is a 3D scan, this is an exact replicate, square by square, it's computer calculated or however they do it. And it's more accurate than the walkthroughs that we did of, the realtor stuff that we've all been walking through and looking at. The thing about it is, though, like, I just feel like there could be like a type of gap in the jurors' minds where they're not ready to get on board with like, this is the new way that we're going to show crime scenes. Like, sort of like in the Scott Peterson trial, like with the whole internet information that was gathered in that case, that was so early in computer forensics and stuff like that in court, that the jury didn't understand that, like, it looked as though somebody was using Lacey's laptop during the time the prosecution said that she was already passed away. So they just, in my opinion, in that case, they weren't able to express it to the jurors that this means this. This means somebody was active on this computer. That's what this data means. All that was very new, where nowadays, they have computer experts go up and everyone sort of kind of understands it now. Like, it takes time for people to kind of accept like a new technology, technique, etc. So I'm just wondering if this computer, exactly, Allison, you always say what I'm thinking. She said, in my opinion, computer generated takes away a personal connection. And that's exactly what the juror pretty much says in the article I'll read for you guys, that it just felt more real. It was much more clear in their minds, like the distance between A and B, like when they're talking about it in the trial. I just feel like this 3D scan concept, and just to say like, well, this is the new way that we're doing it, I just don't know if that's the route to take. I feel it's very risky. So let me just continue this and you guys keep sharing your thoughts.
So it's been going on for months of asking them. And every time they come back and they give us a date, it gets moved back. So I'm hoping that they'll just stop it.
Well, we saw in Parkland, and granted, it's a different situation. More time has gone by in there, but I mean, to see that some of these families are going to go inside that building, it breaks your heart. But at the same time, you can understand, people want to see where their loved one, had their final moments. Is that a discussion that's come up at all with the Gonzalez's or any of the other families that in terms, I mean, would they eventually want to go inside?
Well, remember in Parkland, though, they know who did it.
Yeah.
They knew who the person was. I think he admitted to it. They arrested him on the scene. And the jury still wanted to go take a look at the property, right?
Yeah.
This is a case where we don't know anything about the case. We don't have any facts about it. We don't know what's involved in it. And so I think it's emotional for a lot of the families as well. It's the last place where their child was. And I think as part of the healing process as well, is you may not want to step in that house now, but maybe later you might want to take a look and just be where your child was the last time they were alive. And it seems very dramatic, but it's a very emotional, and you also, the families, there's a need to stay connected to the people that were there, Dylan and Bethany, as being their roommates. I think the families feel there's a certain amount of bond there because they were there, right? And you can't explain it as the victims' families. Only the victims can go through that are going through that. But, there's a lot of value to it. I think there's a lot of evidentiary value to it. And then there's also the personal aspect of it for the families. And I would implore that anybody who has any influence on the University of Idaho, who's a graduate or calls them and tells them to stop what they're doing and listen to the victims' families.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point you make.
And good morning, Alex Erickson and Tiffany and everyone else, House Huddle, everyone who's joining us. It's good to see you. Hi, Caroline, Delana, good to see you. So since he's asking for anyone who has, means to kind of step up and let the college know, like, your thoughts on this, like T-Rev, the YouTuber, has created a petition. I'm going to link it in chat. I just think that if there's anything that we can do to help the families, then even if this petition doesn't go anywhere, I think, why not sign it or share it out for you guys to sign it if you wanted to? Let me just link it. It's going to be in chat. So this is a change.org petition that T-Rev has set up, pretty much arguing their side and the family side of the stance, like, just keep it until trial is done. Remember, he wanted a speedy trial, bryankohberger. So holding on to the house just a little bit longer, I just don't see the harm in it. And I really don't see the rush in getting rid of it. Jax makes a good point. Vast majority of murder case juries don't need to go to the crime scene, but I can see how it would be useful here. And just think about DM's eyewitness account of allegedly Brian, for the jurors to see her room, how her door was opened, where she was standing when he walks by, allegedly with his mask on, clad in black. All that is going to be important, in my opinion. So it's just, I think that this case in particular is an instance where, they talk about the sounds that were picked up on an audio, on the camera, on the other house. We want to see jurors go into this crime scene and think, like, okay, so if the neighbors heard this and I'm standing right where DM is, or I'm standing where BF is down in her room, how did the camera pick this up, but the people in the house didn't hear this? Like, all that kind of needs to be seen and addressed and laid out appropriately for the jurors to kind of understand and make the best vote, like, for their verdict.
Shannon, I mean, it does seem like it's just so soon that they just sort of want to erase, in a sense, what happened there, almost from like a PR perspective.
Thank you for watching. Go to news.
And I feel like a lot of the things that this case has done from the beginning have looked like a PR type decision. Like when they told the family, like, we don't want you to hang wanted posters or flyers up around the campus, stuff like that just kind of leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And unfortunately, I feel like it doesn't make the prosecution look good either. Even though the prosecution is obviously separate from the university, I think that people kind of clump them together because they're, entities for the community. They represent Moscow in a way, and justice should be had before any university or anyone is like, okay, you know what, we've had enough of this eyesore and we want to move on. What better way for a community to heal and move on than to just do it after the trial's done, in my opinion. Now that we went through that, I'll play my pre-recorded stuff that has jurors from other cases who have visited the crime scene, their perspective and opinion on it. It's also got some law professors and juror experts, one from Cornell University, that are giving their opinion on it. And let me think what else is in this article. It's pretty much just going to talk about other cases where jurors have gone to the crime scene. So I hope you guys find it interesting. And good morning, Titanium Built and MK and everyone else. Johnny, it's good to see you. Candace. Okay, so let me just pull this up and then we'll go back into discussing the case in general. And I'll give my opinion at the end of this about how I believe, why I think that it should be kept. And yeah, so remember, if CDT comes in, is she in here? Because it is her birthday today. So I'm going to pause the segment of me reading to elaborate a little bit when need be. Okay, so let me just pull this up and play it. And thank you all for being here. Please hit like if you haven't done so. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit like and subscribe.
The bodies were found in bed, suggesting the victims were attacked while sleeping. One victim, Xana Kernodle, had defensive wounds, according to her father.
New information tonight about the two roommates who were in the house while the murders took place. They were unhurt and apparently unaware of the attack.
Pretty large knife, so it's really hard to call them puncture wounds. And they were definitely stabbings. And I mean, it has to be somebody that's pretty angry.
We still believe it's a targeted attack.
This is the parking lot we've been hearing about right behind their home. I mean, it's right here.
I would look up and I would see people in the windows almost every night.
And close enough that his phone was touching their Wi-Fi.
We believe we have our guy, the one that committed these murders.
We hope that they picked the right guy, and that gives us hope, and we haven't had hope for a long time.
I said early on that we're not going to let any stone go unturned. And I meant that, and we're following up on everything, just like we're in this new phase now, and we're going to follow up to get to know who he is and everything about him that we can.
Ultimately, it was DNA that connected him to the murders.
All right, CDT's here. Happy birthday, CDT. Everyone has already been wishing you happy birthday because I mentioned it in the beginning of the stream, but I just wanted to pause it and say happy birthday again, and also read E.E. Caroline's message as well. I think the motives for rushing to demolish are interesting. This is a university selling 4 years of partying to people who are going to end up in retail, same as if they didn't go to college. And I just think also, I agreed with something that Laura Croft said too. Being in a rush to knock it down suggests to me they got something to hide. And that's the thing, is a lot of people keep saying that. And whether or not that's true, it just gives that vibe, doesn't it? Like, I was thinking, like, even if they don't have anything to hide and they just think like what's, you know, they have their reasons for keeping it up. In fact, I heard a new excuse, I think the other day, was they used toxic chemicals for processing the crime scene in there, which could be harmful for the jurors, etc. And I'm like, there must be some way that they could get around that, or have the jurors wear masks or something, you know. It's just, and plus I was like confused why that excuse just now came out. Like, why didn't that come out like weeks and months ago for the reason, you know what I mean? I just thought that was weird that that narrative is now being pushed. But I pretty much, that's my consensus on all this, is it gives off the appearance that you're hiding something or that you're unsure about your narrative, you know, whether it's how things went down, like the timeline, or whether it's, do you have the right guy? Like I fully believe that Kohberger is involved. I don't really think that there's a chance that he was framed, but I am very much feeling like, do you not have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and you want to get rid of the house because it's just too risky to kind of have that there for them to look at? Okay, they took, yeah, I heard that too, Titanium. They took the floors and baseboards out. It's all bizarre. They've literally just altered it so much. They've emptied it out. It's just very strange. The vast estate is as idyllic as it is secluded. Its fishing pond, expansive farmland, and 4-bedroom home shrouded by trees and a windy driveway that keep it out of the view from the highway. Jurors weighing the fate of Alex Murdoch, the prominent South Carolina lawyer charged with murdering his wife and son, traveled past the no trespassing signs to see where the murder took place. One of the last stages of the trial before they begin to reach a verdict. The jury visit on Wednesday morning was to be followed by closing arguments from the prosecution and defense, after which 12 jurors will begin deliberations. Jurors spend roughly an hour on the property walking between the dog kennels in a nearby shed and examining the outside of the main residence, about a 500-yard driveway. One juror could be seen standing in the doorway of a small feed room where Paul was killed. It is rare for jurors to see, and here they're talking about when they went to the Alex Murdoch estate and seeing the feed room where the victims were lying, etc. Just imagine that for Idahofour, you know, like wouldn't they want to see, like, okay, this is the hallway where in the PSA it says that the detective saw, you know, Xana laying there, and this must be the angle, and you know, they're not allowed to talk to each other like when they're in these scenes, but still, like, each juror would be able to piece it together in person. To visit crime scenes, and experts said bringing the jurors out of the tightly controlled courtroom environment and into the real world could carry significant risks for both the prosecution and defense. There are a lot of dangers with this, said Nancy S. Martyr, a law professor and jury expert at the Chicago-Kent College of Law. I'm thinking it could definitely be risky for the prosecution in Brian's case. But why do you guys think that it would be risky for the defense? I'm just curious why. I don't know. It just seems like maybe the timeline and the time that they're saying that Brian was in the house for, all that, like maybe they just feel like if they're in the house, they won't believe it or something. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. I would want to see the crime scene. And that's the thing too, is once these jurors are picked, mind you, they're not supposed to know anything about the case before they're on the jury. Once they find out, like, oh, well, yeah, we tore down the house, will the jurors feel like they're trying to hide something? Like the same way that some of us are feeling like, what do you got to hide? Like, that's not good either. Who remembers sitting at a Starbucks in Los Angeles when a bus full of jurors in the O.J. Simpson trial passed by during their visit to the crime scene. For example, experts said lawyers are not allowed to point things out or speak with the jurors. You don't know what jurors will see when they get to the place, Ms. Martyr said. They might focus on very different things. But the visits can also help jurors visualize a scene, and jury visits have been held in high-profile cases, including the sentencing trial of the school shooter in Parkland, the trial of the police officer who was charged over the fatal Breonna Taylor raid, and perhaps most famously O.J. Simpson murder trial in Los Angeles. Melody Vinoy was among the jurors who toured the high school in the Parkland trial, which had largely been left untouched since 14 students and 3 employees were killed there in 2018. Ms. Vinoy said the visit was disturbing but important as she considered whether to sentence the gunman Nicholas Cruz to life in prison or to death. So that case was a DP case as well. So that's interesting to know. And also, did you hear how she said the scene was kept as is? You know, as soon as the crime happened, they didn't alter it. So they weren't emptying personal items and giving those back to the family. They weren't saying, okay, let's donate this furniture to another school that might need it. Like, they kept everything as is until the trial was over. So, that's interesting because it's a whole school. Like, that's something that's in use that the public, taxpayer money went towards, etc. And yet they decided, you know what? Let's just shut this down, keep it as is, and we'll have the jurors walk through it. Then we can do what we want with it after. She was among a minority of jurors who voted for the former. Was it painful? Absolutely, she said. But in going, I think it was helpful because it brings the case to light. Jurors are typically not allowed to speak with each other about the case until deliberations begin. And Ms. Vanoy said it was a unique experience to walk through the process, such a disturbing scene without speaking to her colleagues. You cannot naturally process your emotions in the moment, she said. Your gut is to say, oh my God, did you see X? But you can't. It was quiet. Miss Vanoy said she found the visit helpful in understanding the physical distance between points in the school that had been discussed in trial. So, discussing points in the school that were discussed in trial for the Parkland case helped this juror come to her conclusion. So, this was, I think, 2018. I'm not sure when the trial was, but I think the crime was 2018. Either way, it's current time. They could have used a 3D model. It sounds as though, I think, as this goes on, that they did show like pictures and diagrams and stuff. But this juror was, able to come to her conclusion much easier by going to the scene. Mr. Murdoch admitted from the witness stand that he was at the dog kennels where the killings occurred with his wife and son in the minutes before the killings, but he said he drove a golf cart back to the main house before the shootings took place. His lawyers have stated that Mr. Murdoch would not have been able to hear the gunshots from inside the house. Mr. Murdoch then left the property to visit his mother, an act the prosecution has painted as calculated effort to build an alibi. Valerie Hans, a law professor and jury expert at Cornell University, said jury visits can help to humanize defendants or show a different side to them, such as when jurors in the O.J. Simpson case were allowed to see a trophy room in his house where the former NFL football star stored his accolades. So that example kind of doesn't come into play at all in the Kohberger case, because Nicole Brown Simpson was killed at a house that they had owned together, but she was living in. And, the defense went in and were able to stage the house how they wanted. So when the jurors walked through it, they were able to, like it said, the Cornell professor just said, in some instances, you're able to humanize the defendant. So that wouldn't apply here because it's not Kohberger's house that the jurors would be touring. So there's nothing in there to kind of paint him as, like he's just going for his PhD and he doesn't have a real violent criminal record, etc. And, the defense will do that in different ways in the Kohberger case. Like they'll try to humanize him, obviously, but it's not going to be in the same way the OJ one was. And honestly, when they went through the Murdoch house, it makes me wonder if they were kind of turned off by his wealth, maybe. It was just super risky for them to do it in Murdoch's trial, I feel. It's a gamble, Ms. Hand said. In asking for the visit, one of Mr. Murdoch's lawyers, Dick Harpootlian, said he wanted jurors to be able to see the distance between various geographical points discussed in the case and the size of a small feed room where Paul was found dead. And isn't it interesting, now that we know that Murdoch was convicted, that his lawyers pushed for a juror visit? And it's like, to me, I felt like that was a really bad move, because while his lawyers tried to argue, like, no, he was on a golf cart on his way back to the house. Look at the distance. There's no way he could have known gunshots were going off. To me, it kind of did the opposite. And it seems as though it did the opposite for some jurors too, because they realized, like, yes, while there is a long distance between the two, I believe in the short time that he's saying he was at the house or traveling to the house, he would have been able to hear the gunshots going off at the kennels. So it really worked against the defense in the Murdoch case. So it's just interesting how his lawyers were so confident in the jurors visiting the crime scene in that case, and it worked against them. Yeah, exactly, Caroline. Way bad move for defense. And good morning, Roxanne. Good to see you. And hello, Duke and Sleuth Mom. Good to see you guys. And hello, Deco, Painter and T, and everyone else who's joining. You can't really appreciate the spacious issues without actually seeing them, he said in court. Cretan Waters, the lead prosecutor, opposed the request, noting that the property has changed in the last 20 months since the crime. And see, it says here, like we were saying earlier, that the prosecution was like, no, like not in agreement at all with Dick Harpootlian wanting to bring jurors there. Like, no, it's changed. The season's different. The lawn is different. The trees are different. All that comes into play when you're talking about what he might have been able to hear or see. So that already has pretty much taken place in the Idaho case, where one side could argue like, no, we're not going to have the jurors go back there because you emptied the entire place out. You gave the family back the personal items. Like, it looks nothing like it did the night of. I've heard Titanium Built mention, you know, the acoustics of the house would be totally different. And it's true. It's like when you're in an empty apartment or you're in an empty whatever, it's more echoey and all that. Like that, when we're talking about sounds that could have been heard that night and what DM heard or whatever, everything's different. Perhaps there was something there that DM was like behind where Brian didn't see her, but now that piece of furniture is gone. I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure, but I'm just saying like everything is just absolutely altered at this point, including trees between the kennels, the main house, and are marked taller and thicker than in the past. Judge Clifton Newman allowed the visit and attended along with the lawyers. Stu Matthews, a defense lawyer based in Cincinnati, requests jury visits in just about every serious case he takes on. He said he did so last year when he successfully represented Brett Hankinson, the former police officer who was found not guilty of endangering Breonna Taylor's neighbors during a fatal police raid of her apartment. Mr. Matthews said that while he could not be sure, he thought the jury visit had helped jurors in the case understand the scene and perhaps understand the defense argument that Mr. Hankinson did not know there was another apartment attached to Miss Taylor's. We had as evidence diagrams and photographs, Mr. Matthews said, but none of that does justice to actually getting out there and seeing 360-degree live views. All right, so that was the end of the article that pretty much had experts and lawyers and even jurors give their take on when they went to a scene. So pretty much I'm at the point where it's like, even if they kept the house up, it's nothing like it was. You know, the furnitures aren't there, the sound, everything's different. But at the same time, I'm feeling like they should still have the opportunity. And if the defense wants to oppose it and the judge says, yeah, you're right, like this is nothing like it was, there's no point in bringing them there, then that is what it is. But I think that it should be given the option for them, for the prosecution or the defense to say, you know what, I've decided that I want the jurors to go there. Because in my opinion, I feel like the Alex Murdoch trial like started off, nobody thought that was going to happen. I don't think that the jurors thought like, okay, good, we're going to be able to go on a field trip in a few weeks and we're going to get to see the crime scene. Seems to me like it was just kind of thrown out there like as like a last Hail Mary, in addition to putting Alex up on the stand, which both moves I think worked not in his favor. But it seems as though it wasn't like something that was always planned out. So what if they get to trial and in the Idaho case and one of them think like near the end of it or in the middle of the trial, like, you know what, I do think that they should go there, because we just don't know what the witnesses are going to say up on the stand and what their take of things are going to be, where say one side wants to counter argue whatever was set up on the stand by having the jurors, well, you know what, they said this, I'm going to bring you there and we're going to look. And you're going to see like whether or not you can fully trust this person who said blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So I just feel like the excuse, well, we want to have the community heal. I just think that that's a good excuse, and people can be empathetic towards that and understand that. But ultimately, it's like, it's not really the best way to heal, which I think should be kind of pushed as the narrative as a way for the community to kind of like go arm in arm. Like, yeah, you're right, is we want justice for the victims, and we want to make sure that Bryan's given a fair trial. So, you know, that's the best way to heal. All right. So now what I want to do in the stream. So yeah, I just had, that was kind of like the last little chat I wanted to do about the house. Of course, comment down below or comment in chat your thoughts about the house, and we can keep it going. And we can just, yeah, that's a thing too, Caroline, is it astounds me that they're using the excuse of the community wants to move on and heal. I mean, what better way to heal and be a community than to stand with the families of the victims? Like by saying like, you know what? No, I don't care what the family has to say. I want to heal. To me, that's not going to heal. It's going to cause, it's already caused division. You know what I mean? So it's just, it's strange. And what if people get wind of how the university owns the house, and the university asked the family what they wanted and then didn't listen to the family? Like, wouldn't that leave a bad taste in your mouth if you were like a parent who was looking at this school for your kids to go to? Like, I'd be like, wow, that's pretty heartless. I don't want to give them my money. Like, these little things I think can sway someone's mind about having their child go there. Or even people who aren't going to the university say they want to buy a house in Moscow, and they end up looking up Moscow on the internet, and all this stuff comes up about demolishing a house, and they're like, what's this? And they find out all this stuff. Like, that's just, it looks bad for the community, in my opinion. Yeah, Unravel, it's selfish. All right, so these other videos, I just kind of wanted to play with you guys. And then I have an article that was, let me check the date on the article because I found it interesting. Of course, it's not loading. Okay, so the article that I'll pull up after we play some of these video clips is from early in the investigation. So let me just play the clips. Oh yeah, the 18th. So literally days after, and I felt like it had some interesting stuff in it. So want to revisit that too before the stream is over. Yeah, Llama Mama, that's the thing is, and I'm not saying that it is a cover up, but it looks like one, and that's the problem. You know what I mean? All right. So again, thank you all for being here. And if you haven't wished CDT a happy birthday, today is her birthday. She's a dear friend of mine that I met through true crime. So I just want to wish her a happy birthday, and I hope that she has a good day where she's at. It's rainy here, so I hope it's better there for you. Okay, so this one is a couple weeks old. No, 12 days old. I just found this interesting. Again, it's his personal opinion about Kohberger's body language, but I thought it was interesting. So I wanted to play this one. And then there's a Megyn Kelly segment that had Mark Garagos on it, who was the defense attorney for Scott Peterson. And I feel like he always has good insight. Some people like him, some people don't like him, but I think that hearing a defense attorney's perspective on this case is really important. So I wanted to pull that up too after. And hello, Scout Inquirer and everyone else joining.
Which was somewhat unusual and interesting. The defense has argued that allowing viewers to scrutinize every blink and gesture could hinder Kohberger's chances of getting an impartial jury and a fair trial. In the almost 6 months since Kohberger's arrest, we've gotten only occasional views of him, mostly court dates. There were a couple times that I saw him outside when they would bring him inside different buildings, but for the most part, we've only really seen him inside the courthouse. The question is, has his body language changed over that time? What did his behavior today show? The people who study this, joined by one of those people, behavior and body language expert, Scott Rouse. Scott, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm curious, again, because Twitter was exploding today with people reacting to seeing him in court, really just analyzing his every move. What did you make of him today? Because to me, he looked relatively calm. I don't know if that's something that his attorney Ann Taylor has sort of coached him on, but he looked calm and composed.
And many people have pointed out, which I kind of showed a little bit in the beginning with the clips, how the defense team came into the courtroom with like smirks on their face. And then it was like Brian just walked in, obviously like emotionless looking. And I find it interesting and sort of kind of funny in a way that, the judge has told the media, like, please do not do close-ups on the defendant. Please do not only put the camera in his direction, blah, blah, blah. And while it did kind of seem like they were showing more images of the judge, I don't feel like the media has really listened to the judge when he's asked them not to zoom in on Kohberger's face, because I'm still seeing like a ton of close-ups. Anybody else?
You're always going to get someone that's giving you witness prep in a situation like this. And there are things you want to look for and things you want to make sure you see and make sure everything that is supposed to be there is there. The thing that really caught my attention was the fact that he has a lot of pursed lips cues. He does this a lot. Does that? It's really quick. He does a lot of those. And he also does this little thing it's almost like a lizard tongue jut. It's not mouth grooming. Quite often we refer to this as mouth grooming when the tongue comes out and does something like that, but his juts out really quickly. These kind of things automatically took me to thinking this may be what's called or referred to as tardive dyskinesia, which is caused by antipsychotic drugs.
So he is alleging and giving off his opinion of his body language. And what do you guys think about him theorizing that Brian could possibly be on antipsychotic drugs?
And that's when you get those for schizophrenia and depression or a bipolar disorder. That's one possibility of those. Another possibility would be we see those because those are the adapters he's using, the things he's using to get rid of the built-up stress and tension. But I'm not seeing built-up stress and tension anywhere else. He's not using adapters in his hands. He's showing no facial expressions whatsoever. In the first video that Christopher, your producer, sent, where he was in the orange suit in court, we did see one smile very quick, but we didn't see much at all in the eyebrow movement and the brow movement. That lets us know that he's either super focused on what's going on, which normally you would be, or maybe he's on some kind of somewhere on the spectrum, maybe. But there's
and I'm not saying I agree with this, but what do you guys think about people theorizing that he could possibly be somewhere on the spectrum, which sort of reminds me of, and I hate to bring his name up, but Chris Watts' case. A lot of people speculated that about Chris. Again, they're gonna tell their client to not show emotions and, don't smile, obviously. Like this, that was Lori Vallow's issue too. She was very smirky in all these shots of her. And people just did not like that. It just rubbed them the wrong way. So of course they're going to prep him and say, like, don't do this, don't do that. But the thing about what I've noticed with Brian is, we have that image. We have many images of him, actually, not very many of him smiling. And not only that, even when the graduation video was kind of shared with everyone, the guy, professor, I'm assuming, who's handing him the diploma has like an ear-to-ear smile. Like, of course, he's congratulating them, I'm sure. And it shows every kid walk before Brian with a smile on their face, grabbing the diploma. Then Brian comes up, no expression change at all. Just blank, no smile, he didn't even smirk at all. So while we can say like, well, yeah, he's told not to smile and stuff like that for the courtroom, we have stuff of him prior. I mean, who wouldn't be smiling while they're grabbing their diploma, in my opinion? I don't know. It's just something I've noticed. He just seems very much expressionless. So I think it's interesting that this expert is speculating that maybe it's antipsychotic drugs that he's on, or maybe he could be on the spectrum. Just noteworthy things.
Even though they say there's, you can't see much, and what we don't want him to see is make decisions about his blink rate and things like that. His blink rate is fairly low. The normal blink rate for a person is about 15 to 20 times a minute. And this guy's is really, really low. We're not seeing much there at all. We are seeing some clenching of the jaw. That's why you see that muscle right there pop out some.
But I want to show you, Scott, there's a side-by-side we have of Bryankohberger's first court appearance and then the one today. And you can see them next to each other. And I want to get your reaction. You see here, this is him when he was in the car versus today. Is there anything? He did look kind of bigger to me today. I mean, he's had almost like a bulletproof vest on in the past. I don't know that he has that on underneath the suit today, which you see on the right side of your screen. But do you notice any major differences from him in the car before the arrest?
No, he's not wearing a bulletproof vest in that one where he's coming in the court. I can tell you that. But in the car, he looks fairly relaxed. But again, we're not seeing some things we should see. We're not seeing any eyebrow movement, not much at all. And he's very calm. And everything looks, it's a great non-felony stop for the police officer. But in the court, he's fairly still in the car. But his face has changed just a little bit because he's relaxed in the car. But here he's focused on what's going on, and he's very apprehensive about what's happening. Every time you're in court, you're apprehensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are people watching this for sure who are thinking, I mean, my gosh, you're analyzing every single move this guy makes. Who wouldn't be nervous in court? Exactly. Is this really fair to be doing this? The judge didn't want the camera to be focused on him the whole time. Bryankohberger's lawyers have called body language analysis actually a pseudoscience that could keep him from getting a fair trial. What do you make of it?
We hear that a lot when it comes to being a pseudoscience, but there's so much research that backs all those things up. If you're not dealing with someone who just Googles their information and comes on and says, this means so-and-so, and this means so-and-so.
Yeah.
When you look at this from a neurological perspective, those are the things you want to look for. You want to look for things that will show you stress. We're not seeing much stress in this guy at all. We're not seeing anything in this guy at all. No emotions, when he says yes, he just leans forward and says yes and leans back. If they've done any training for him, they've told him just to say yes or whatever because he doesn't move much, he doesn't do much. But I go back to those things we're seeing, that all that lip pursing in every one of these videos. I didn't see it in the car, but I did see the tongue jet 3 times in the car. It's a really quick little tongue jet that comes out. That's why I go back to that tardive dyskinesia and my concern about maybe there was a psychological situation going on there before.
So if he's talking about in the car, then he's assuming that possibly he's been on medications before his court appearances. So he's talking about the pullover instances where he's watching their body language, etc. So I find that interesting. So in his mind, which he is, I believe, ex-FBI, I don't know his title, what it was, but he was law enforcement. I know that. And it's just his opinion. Again, I'm not saying I agree with everything he's saying, but I did find this interesting. And also I agree with this comment, misbehaving. The judge will order no cameras if News Nation keeps this up. And I love Brian Enton, but I just found it kind of funny how he starts the segment off talking about how the judge has said no close-ups of my client or the client, please. And please don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And then he has this expert come on and he's like, so what do you think about his appearance? I just found that kind of funny, but interesting at the same time. So what do you guys think? Could Brian have been on medications? We know that he went to a doctor for a physical, but we don't know much details, obviously, beyond that because of HIPAA laws. But he was seeing a doctor out in, was it Washington, when he was out there? So I don't know. It's Yeah, and that's the thing, sweetie pie. I agree. Most inmates are on antidepressants to make their time easier, but he's speculating that his lip movements, again, this is just speculation, and his opinion on the body language, that he could have been on them when he was in those pullover moments. I don't know. Either way, let me carry on, and then we'll play another segment too and discuss some more. And thank you all again for being here. I'm going to link the petition again by T-Rev that is asking for everyone to sign it in hopes that they do not demolish the house. So if you want to sign it, feel free. If not, no problem. I just figured, why talk about keeping the house if I'm not going to share some petition that seems to be gaining some momentum
for all this. And
Interesting.
he may have been on drugs for that.
And he's definitely, I mean, look, we've seen him in the car during the traffic stop. We've seen him with his dad in the car on that body camera video. Every time there is something very, very odd about his mannerisms and sort of the way that he interacts with people, which is interesting. It's interesting to hear you sort of analyze the way he looks in court. Scott Rose, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it.
All right, so let me share Mark Garagos. And again, this is the defense attorney. I'm sure he's tried more cases, obviously, than Scott Peterson, but that's the one that he's most famous for. He's always on the media, kind of giving his take. And I find it interesting. And I thought what he had to say here was interesting. I've never played Megyn Kelly live before, so I really hope she doesn't strike me. I will be pausing it, obviously, for fair use and to, you know, elaborate on what she has to say and what he has to say. So again, let me just play that for you guys, and I'll link that petition right now.
Because that case is just so compelling, fascinating, horrifying, and some significant developments have gone down in the past couple of days. Number one, prosecution seeking the death penalty. Is anyone surprised by this? Marcia, as the former prosecutor, I'll start with you on that.
Not really. And all of the, you have to remember, and I guess one of the critics, people who are critical of the death penalty are going to point this out as well. You're in Idaho. Idaho has different mores and different standards in terms of what is death worthy than, say, California does. That said, the horrific murder of 4 young people in this manner that clearly appears to be premeditated, if true, it's now alleged, but if proven, really does show a very serious, the kind of offender where you would expect the death penalty to be on the table for sure. And now they have said in their letter, they can withdraw the intent because at this time they don't have any evidence of mitigation being the defense effort to show why his life should be spared. So it's early days yet, but if when a crime jumps off the page at you like this, that is the kind of crime where if you have a death penalty, you would the case would be death eligible. So I can't say I'm surprised, but I do say, let's wait and see if they hang on to this. I don't know that they will.
This everyday wireless bra from TrueCrime has the chef's kiss.
Raise the challenge for process.
And I agree, Caroline, all the more reason to preserve every single bit of evidence in the because this is a DP trial. It's just, like I said, I looked up other cases where they demolished the house or the crime scene before trial, and I couldn't find a single one. I'm sure there's some out there, so if you guys dig or whatever, let me know. But in my little skim through to kind of source and compare, I didn't find any.
Prosecutors going in front of a jury, that some theorize it makes juries more reluctant to convict if they know the death penalty may be on the table.
No, I take the opposite view, and I hearken back to a case I had, which was Scott Peterson. I was complaining in real time that they were seeking the death penalty, not because they wanted the death penalty, but because they wanted to get pro or I should say, death penalty eligible jurors. One of the reasons that Scott's death penalty was reversed unanimously by the California Supreme Court was precisely because the judge was kicking off everybody on that jury who didn't want to or was uncomfortable with imposing the death penalty. Most of the studies have shown death penalty jurors are more pro-prosecution. You combine that with the fact that, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but with a circumstantial evidence case like this, you want somebody, if you're a prosecutor, who is going to be more pro-prosecution.
So that right there was the whole reason why I wanted to share this segment, because he's talking statistics, he's talking from experience. He tried a incredibly high profile case, and it was DP. And he's basically saying, he's like, any juror that they went through to kind of pick the jury that wasn't for DP were immediately excluded. And that, and him saying that, you know, most DP jurors are pro-prosecution. So that means already Kohberger's defense is at sort of a unfair. Well, I don't know. Do you guys think that it's already started out as being unfair then? Because he's stating in most statistics and what he has seen, when it's a pro-DP jury, which they can't sentence him to death if they're not kind of for it. Like they weed through all that and they will pick specifically. But already the defense is at a disadvantage, in my opinion, stepping into a jury where it is like everyone's for the DP, because they are usually more pro-prosecution, is what Mark Garagos is saying. And if he's 100% guilty, that's fabulous, you know, and the state, the burden of proof is on the state, and then everything should go smoothly because they're going to lay everything out and explain everything. But it just is like interesting to kind of know, like, Ann Taylor at this moment knows that the jury is going to be pro-prosecution already statistically, because they're it's a DP case. So I just feel like that is almost at like an unfair advantage for the prosecution. And remember, he's innocent until proven guilty. So it's not that I'm for Kohberger's freedom. I just want things to be fair, and everyone should be given a fair trial if they were in Kohberger's spot. So it's just interesting to hear this guy mention, you know, through statistics, that's what he knows about it.
This is a perfect way to weed out the people who would be more on the fence.
All right. So speaking of the evidence, now we have learned that we knew before that the prosecution had used something called genetic genealogy.
And also, isn't it interesting that he says that this is a circumstantial case? And it really is. I mean, the touch DNA on the sheath can be explained. And I'm sure they're going to try to explain it. Obviously, it looks very, very bad, but it is still sort of a circumstantial case.
To figure out, where did this DNA found on the knife sheath that had been left by the murderer at the murder scene, where did it come from? They were told that they had done a regular search in the FBI's database. You know, does this match a perp who we have in the system? And it did not. So they went to genetic genealogy, where you can use public databases, and in this case, private databases as well, of not private to you and me, but in other words, a special database that they went to try to figure out whether it has, thank you, non-governmental. To figure out whether this DNA we have matches anybody whose DNA is publicly available. And that's how they zeroed in on Kohberger. It wasn't his, but they said we can definitely link it to the dad who lives in the Poconos, someone related to that dad. And then the circles got more concentric around the son, Brian, who was 10 miles away from the murder scene. Marcia, we now know that they retested the son himself, Bryan Kohberger. They took a cheek swab, and they are now saying it showed a direct match, Bryan Kohberger's DNA on that knife sheath. So we're going to get into how a lot of the other evidence is circumstantial. That's not circumstantial.
Well, it is actually. Isn't it
It
funny?
is?
People have this notion that circumstantial means something much more removed, but circumstantial evidence is a fingerprint. Circumstantial evidence is DNA. I used to tell the juries all the time, I would say, this is largely a circumstantial evidence case. And then they'd say, well, you're out. Never mind. I'm not interested. I said, well, how about the fact that there's a fingerprint and the victim's on the victim's shoulder? And, well, but that's not circumstantial. Oh, it is. It is. So's DNA.
Huh.
Same thing. The limitation of circumstantial evidence is, and with DNA, for example, or a fingerprint, is you can't tell when it was deposited. So, for example, you have this amazing result of DNA, 1 in 5 octillion chance of that it is him as opposed to a randomly selected person, unrelated. So that's virtually, that is a match. But you don't know when that DNA got on there. And you don't know how that knife sheath got on there. So it leaves room for the defense to say someone else dropped the knife sheath. Of course, it was mine at one time. I had my fingerprints on it. I had my DNA on it from months ago. So in that sense, it is circumstantial, but it is very damning. I mean, what is your knife sheath doing under the body of one of the victims when you have no known natural or unculpable reason for being there? They didn't know each other. They didn't party together. So just the fact the knife sheath was there, and then of course the DNA on it, you put it all together, but it's all circumstantial.
Well, let me ask you a question on that, because that's interesting. If his bloody fingerprint were found at the scene, or if DNA from the victims were found in his car, would that also be circumstantial?
Yes, same thing. You can't say when it got put there. No one saw it get put there. Direct evidence is me seeing, if you go and shoot somebody and I watch you do it, that is direct evidence. But of course, I would argue that whoever you shot deserved it. So that's a whole other issue. But
right.
If I don't see it, if you're coming up with evidence that is deposited at some point in time that is not observed by anyone, even a bloody fingerprint, though of course a bloody fingerprint gets a lot closer to something you could call like direct evidence, it's still circumstantial.
That's interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. I never practiced criminal law, so that's interesting to me.
And,
All right, so
Mark,
to
follow up
go
on
ahead.
that, it's interesting because with the Innocence Project, most of the evidence against people who were condemned and sent to death row was as a result of direct evidence, and they were exculpated by the circumstantial evidence of DNA, which is that's one of the things I talk to jurors about in voir dire, to point out the differences of what we always think. It turns out that many of the studies show that direct evidence, eyewitness identification, is much more fallible than circumstantial evidence.
Well, the genetic genealogy link that started it off before they got the actual.
So he's saying that direct evidence, like somebody witnessing it, weighs more weight than, hold on, let me rewind that, because that could come into play when we're speaking on DM. Now, we only know what DM stated in the PCA. They're obviously not going to share everything that she said in her police interview or everything that they know about what she saw and heard in the PCA, but we'll get to hear that later on. Could she be seeing a direct piece of evidence more than what we've seen in the PCA? Like, they're only going to share enough to get him arrested, which a PCA is much more like lenient and more lax when it comes to the judge saying, okay, this is enough. Like, once it gets to trial and things that they want to present as evidence in trial is going to be much more strict. So example, they're saying in the PCA, like, we have his car driving by this house and the camera at this time, blah, blah, blah. They might try to put that in as evidence, and the judge or whatever will say, like, no, that's not solid enough, or no, we're not going to show the jurors that. So it's different standards for getting him arrested. And it sounds bad, but at the same time, that's why you have a trial. And that's the thing about the burden being on the state. Like, you've arrested this person, so now you have to prove to 12 people that this is the guy and that this was just blah, 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 which obviously can go negatively in instances where someone's falsely convicted. But I mean, that's the thing about PCAs, is they're just not as strict as far as like a judge saying, like, no, you need more. Once they got the touch DNA on the knife sheath, I think the judge was like, okay, go ahead, make the arrest. So let me just replay this part again. That's discussing how an eyewitness seems to be more direct and more solid as far as evidence than other circumstantial situations. So let me just hear Mark say it again instead of me. But I always thought that too, Anna, that eyewitness evidence is poor. And in my experience, it does sort of seem that way. Like you could see a car and it's dark blue, but somebody else sees it and says it was black, you know? So this is just interesting for me to hear and take in again. So let me just find that part. And thank you again, guys, for being here. Yeah, and I agree. And it's good to see you, Midwest Mima. There's so much more to learn at trial. And even in the Murdoch trial, you know, the Snapchat that captured Alex Murdoch's voice at the kennels at the time that he said he wasn't there, that wasn't even shown to them until they got to the trial. So in fact, in the phone calls between Buster and his father when he's in county jail, Buster says something about him hearing a rumor that they had found good evidence or something solid. And Alex sort of is like kind of acting like he doesn't really find interest in what Buster's saying. But at the same time, you could tell he was sort of like intrigued. I have those calls too on my channel too. If you want to visit the Alex Murdoch playlist, it's very fascinating to hear everything that Alex was saying before he realized what evidence they had on him. So they get to trial and all of a sudden, and it's totally legal and it's the way that it can be done, that the prosecution handed over like, oh yeah, so we have this Snapchat here. This is our evidence too. That is very much probably what's going to happen for Kohberger. They have something that they're sitting on that's like, oh, this is so concrete, which is why the defense is saying like, I want a date for when we get this. And I want that to be given a date and a deadline. And that's fine. You can have all that stuff that we've agreed on by that deadline, but we could still be sitting on something that is like, you know, so bombshell, you're not going to get it until trial. And that's totally legal. So good morning, Melissa Jade. It's good to see you. And again, happy birthday, CDT.
It turns out that many of the studies show that direct evidence, eyewitness identification, is much more fallible than circumstantial evidence.
Well, the genetic genealogy link that started it off.
So wait, he said it's much more fallible. Can you guys explain that? That sounds bad. So it's not as good, like we were saying? Help me understand, guys. Sorry, I'm watching this with you guys and just reacting live, so.
Genetic genealogy link that started it off before they got the actual cheek swab from the defendant and they were looking more at who in the universe could this DNA on this knife sheath belong to is becoming an issue in the case, Mark. The defense lawyer is asking the court to compel prosecutors to turn over additional discovery materials and info on the genetic genealogy techniques investigators used before labeling Kohberger their suspect. They're also asking for information on why the FBI expanded the range of model years.
Thank you, Janice. And this is why I love my subs. You guys are all so smart, and I just really appreciate learning things through the chat and through my comments down below. He's saying eyewitness testimonies is fallible, subject to error, which is kind of the page that we were all on. So I'm glad we re-listened to that. But interesting that some people take eyewitness as very solid, which we all kind of agreed before we replayed this, that like, wait a minute, I thought that that wasn't very reliable. So eyewitness as in witness of the crime, or eyewitness as in seeing someone around the same time of the crime. One could be stronger than the other. And both could be wrong because they're just not, it's just not a reliable account. So when thinking about that, does that work in favor for the defense? Was Dylan seeing what she said she saw? Like, did he have bushy eyebrows? You know what I mean? Like, was he really wearing black, or could it have been navy gray or navy blue or dark gray, you know, or charcoal? Those things they could kind of punch holes in. Like, well, isn't it true that eyewitness accounts really aren't that stable? And and don't really uphold much, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're just going to go through it all.
On a white Hyundai Elantra they were looking for in connection with the case. Now, those two items that they want discovery on might have nothing to do with each other, but they might have something to do with one another in that initially the police said they were looking for a Hyundai Elantra of certain years that would not have included Bryankohberger's. And then they expanded the years to a year, his was 2015, that would have.
Sorry to keep pausing, but you guys are having a good chat in the live stream, so I want to read them for the replay viewers. DM's description is not reliable, in my opinion. I just think the description is important to prove that the person did not belong in the home and let out the slider door. And that's comes into play for two things. Now, one, doesn't that give it all the more reason for us to keep the house because her eyewitness account is not really, we all are kind of like, I don't know if that's enough, or, you know, was she drinking that night? They're going to point all that out. Did you smoke any cannabis that evening? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I'm just saying the defense is going to kind of call into question her mentality at that point, or sobriety and mental clarity. Were you tired? Isn't it true that you were laying down and woke up? And could you have been too tired and thought you saw something you didn't see? Or could that come into play in people's decisions making? You know, you get what I'm saying. But yeah, I agree that the eyewitness account just was enough for the PCA. When it comes to the trial, how much of all that will the jury hear? You know what I mean? Because the defense could say, like, we don't want that shared to the jury. Or, you know, it's just going to be interesting to see, like, which way they go. The only thing quoted in the PCA from Dylan is frozen shock phase. The rest is law enforcement who wrote it and who knows how to transform her words. And they... Right. That's their interpretation of her probably police interview, since it was in quotes, in my opinion. You know, are we going to get the police interview? And thank you, MJ, for that comment. How is her description going to be credible if she was in so much shock that they didn't call law enforcement for 8 hours? That's a good point, House Huddle. And I love your perspective. And if anyone needs another true crime channel to follow, she's got good perspective over there too. So that's a good question. And that'll be questioned. Let's say she's up on the stand, you know, how were you able to be in such shock that, you know, you didn't call 911, but this is what you're claiming you saw? It's all going to come into play.
Have been included. And there's been some questions raised about whether that expansion happened after they got the hit on Kohberger's dad and started to zero. So what's the defense attorney doing here? What's he trying to set up?
This is a brilliant strategy by the defense, and I'll tell you why. You've hit exactly on what they think. They're creating a timeline to show that the expansion of the Elantra after the FBI had given an opinion that it would have excluded Kohberger, and then we talked about this. They then went back to them once they had Kohberger, and they expanded the number of years to include his car. But this is...
So that, you know, he's pretty much saying, like, they're gonna make it kind of seem like you guys only went after this one person and you kind of built your case based on this person, which is why you changed the year of the Elantra after he was arrested, or, you know, soon to his new arrest. You know, it's interesting that he's saying that it's a brilliant strategy, because other experts have said, oh, the defense is going to have a long uphill battle if they're going to try to discredit law enforcement. So I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that they have a good strategy, or do you think that it's going to be an uphill climb, and everything that, again, we're going to learn more at trial, but everything that we have on Bryan just, you know, it should be called into question, because, you know, it seems like you guys were just basing your case off of this one person, blah, blah, blah. What do you guys think?
Is also a very subtle kind of a gray mail, because That is a technique in classified documents cases where you say, okay, we're going to go forward. I'm not going to get a classification. You've got to show me the classified documents publicly, and then the prosecutor backs down. We know that the FBI and investigative agencies do not want to reveal how they use or how they get to this genetic testing that then takes them to one of the relatives. So they're saying on one hand, show us that, hoping that they say we're not going to do that. If they turn out and they say, okay, we're going to turn that process, that investigative technique over, but it's under a protective order, that's fine, because then what you're going to do as the defense, you're going to take the two unidentified males that are that were found at the scene, the DNA, and you're going to use the same testing protocol and see who you come up with in the databases based on their very own protocol. And God forbid that you hit somebody who is a potential other suspect, because then you're going to ask all kinds of questions about why their DNA was there, or that universe of alternative suspects, third-party liability.
Junk science. That's what the doctor called many.
All right, and the rest of that segment is just an ad. So I think that concludes everything I wanted to discuss with you guys. I think that at this point, you know, the crime scene has been altered by emptying it out. They've apparently taken baseboards and pieces of it off. It's unfortunate because it seems like the only benefit for the jury to kind of tour the house would be for it to be in the same state that it was the night of, which we all know that it's not. I do still believe that it should still be kept, and maybe either side should be allowed to argue like, well, I still think they should tour it, or, well, I want to show them the backsliding door since this witness said that this took place here, blah, 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 XYZ. Like, I still think that each side should be given the opportunity to kind of argue whatever reason that they think that the house should be kept up, whether it's you're claiming that he parked here and that this crime was committed in this amount of time. Well, I want to show the jury this lot, and I want to show them how big the house is to kind of narrow in on your timeline that you're giving. You know, all that should still be able for the jury to kind of be held on to. Yeah, that's what I'm worried about too, the house huddle. That's grounds for a mistrial. If it's unconstitutional, this will be a new precedent. And I don't want it to get to the point where, let's say he's guilty and convicted under a court of law, and he tries to appeal. Now, again, I don't know all the stipulations of, like, some have appeals, some don't. I don't know. But either way, he appeals it because he says, well, you know, we wanted the opportunity to tour it or to look at it from the outside, and we weren't given that opportunity. So, you know, it's just, I think that it's unfortunate that even the family was asked what they wanted and they weren't listened to, which is why I'm going to share the TREV petition again in chat, and I'll probably link it in the description box too while I'm at it. And then if you guys want to sign it, I mean, who knows? I've signed so many petitions and nothing has like ever happened with them, including, you know, reopen Kurt Cobain's case, all that. But either way, Shannon Gray has asked the public, those who feel like that should be held on to, you know, reach out or do your part or whatever. So I feel like that's the least that I can do is kind of share this petition. And yeah, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you guys always listening and voicing your opinions. Hello, Ava. My concerns for the house are different than I've seen. What about the views from the back parking lot? What about exterior views anywhere? Yeah, I'm on the same page totally. And it's like, you know, we still don't know technically where he parked. We've all speculated it's that parking lot, and it likely will end up being that way, in my opinion. But again, we don't really know until the prosecution has laid out their case to kind of prove what they're claiming. You know, this took place at this time. We have them on camera here. This took place at this time, etc. So yeah, I think that even the outside could add value to a juror. Absolutely. And even if other people don't see it that way, could they at least argue it either side? it should be allowed to at least be argued. Like, okay, everything on the inside has been altered and changed, so it's obviously not the same. But can we at least show them the path that you believe he took, or the timeline it took from where he parked to get to the back door? You know what I mean? And yeah, what about the view from DM's window? Right. Like, is there views where a juror could just help come up with their verdict just from seeing any little detail? It should still just be allowed. But anyways, guys, again, happy birthday, CDT. I hope you have a wonderful day. And yeah, the windows are all boarded up. I mean, yeah, every little bit of the house has been altered, which, Ava goes back to, well, what about the outside view? I mean, I guess the other side who didn't want the jury going there hypothetically could say the outside view is altered too. So it's not the same that it was that night. So no, Judge, I don't want the jury to go there. It's a mess. And you're welcome, MK. I really appreciate your guys' insight too. And I'm sure I'll see you around the YouTube streets in various chats and all that. So we will talk very soon. Comment down below on replay your thoughts. And again, I will talk to you all everywhere, like in YouTube streets on the channels and in the comment section, of course. And if you want to join my Facebook groups, we have true crime discussions there that kind of talk about other cases too that we just don't have time to discuss on here. So talk to you guys soon. And again, I will link that petition to keep the house in the description box. And you guys take care.